Alright, me. It is the day after you finish this book. You tried to record it last night, but you were too tired. But I just finished reading East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is the second time I've read the book. The first time was I was in 10th grade in an advanced English class, and I certainly did not get as much out of it, mostly because I didn't read a whole lot of it. Sorry, Mrs. Bagel. But this time through, I really enjoyed it. Right. Another one of these great American classics. I love John Steinbeck. I'm willing to admit that. I think John Steinbeck is the quintessential American author from, if you want to know anything about half of America, the western half of America, from 1890 to 1930, right? So a 40-year span. John Steinbeck's your guy, right? But this book, right, East of Eden, is effectively trying to answer what would happen if we put the Bible in America in 1880s, 1890s, and the 1910s America, right? That's really what this this book is positing, right? Specifically, it's going through this with the story of Cain and Abel. And Steinbeck actually ends up writing two different versions of the story of Cain and Abel, right? And it's important that we understand both of them. And also the original story of Cain and Abel in the way that is explained by Lee and by Samuel in part 2 of East of Eden. And effectively what it is, right? It's inherently a concept of jealousy, right? It is that the older of two sons, Adam, has been given a job in hunting, I believe it is. It's either hunting or in, taking care of animals. And that is his job, right? And the younger brother, Cain, whose job it is to tend to the fields, right? And what eventually happens is they make a sacrifice for God, and Adam's sacrifice of his animal and the meat of that animal is accepted and praised, whereas Cain's offering of grain is not, right? And this invokes a huge sense of jealousy within Cain. Cain then takes his brother's life, right? He kills Abel and then is removed from Eden, right? Which is where we get the title of this book, East of Eden, right? And what the explanation and the discussion that Lee and Samuel have is about how this is not a murder out of anger at Abel, right? Cain does not kill Abel because he's angry at Abel. Cain is angry at Abel because of the jealousy of the love that Abel receives inherently, right? Abel's job has given him the opportunity to simply give something from his job, right? Versus Cain, who in doing the same action of providing something from his job is not welcomed and received, right? And so we get this first instance of incessant jealousy that drives to passion, right? And he doesn't kill the person he's angry at, he kills a secondary person in all of this. He kills Abel, right? And then Cain is sent and told to wander till he can get over his sins, which is where the plot of the book really happens, right? And it comes from this word timshel. I remember that word coming up way more in the book than it does. It only really comes up in like 4 spots, right, in a 600-page book. But Timshel, right, is a word that has to be translated, right? And as described by Lee and Samuel discussing, there is a version of the book that translates it to "thou shalt." There is a version of it that translates Timshel to "thou will," and then the final translation, which is done by people that are not Christian, right, but are studying the Bible from an outside perspective, translated as "thou mayest," right? And then we have to break down each one of these things, right? "Thou shalt" is, as described, a promise, right? Eventually, thou shalt, right, overcome your wickedness and your evilness. And thou will, right? It's a command. It's a demand that you will do it, right? You will overcome this. And then there's "thou mayest," right? Which I would argue in at least my understanding of modern Christian doctrine, right, is probably the best one, because it is effectively setting up this idea that you as the individual have the power to overcome, right? Much like in Dante's Inferno, where like there's a whole issue in which the taking of one's own life is an issue for people that were born after the birth of Jesus and versus before the birth of Jesus, right? The same thing happens here, in which, right, it's an issue where the willpower and the glory of God comes through one's own individual soul to then express itself, right? And, right, "thou mayest" is you have the opportunity to succeed, but you also have the opportunity to fail, right? And you have to be able to overcome that as an individual, right, to make yourself better, right? And that's Timshel in a nutshell, right? It's "thou mayest," right? It is a possibility with the human will that you may overcome. Within that, right, the book itself is a lot of discussion around, can you be good and by having to overcome evil, right? Or by recognizing the evil within yourself, right? And this is where the Cain and Abel's different stories come in, because we have the first generation, which is Charles and Adam, and they go through 90% of the motions of the Cain and Abel story, right? Adam is the older one, Charles is the younger one. They try to go and give their father a present for his birthday. Adam happens upon a puppy while he's working and gives that puppy to his father, right? Charles, on the other hand, has done extra work, right? He has plotted and sown and harvested extra plots of land to then give that profit, buy a gold watch, or no, sorry, that is buy a pocket knife, and then give that pocket knife to his father, right? And as we later learn, the father goes and lives in DC. At one point, the father leaves the pocket knife, but takes the dog with him, and the dog is eventually buried with him when he dies, right? And it's this first instance of, right, we have someone who has lucked into, by circumstance, the right answer, versus the person that has given and put in significant effort into something, their work not being accepted in the same way, right? Which is an issue, right? But within that, right, Charles attempts to kill Adam out of this jealousy, right? He is jealous about how beloved Adam is in this instance. Charles fails, and Adam is sent into the military, and Charles is effectively forced to stay home and run the farm, right? And he runs it for the rest of his life. And so all of a sudden now we have a reversal of roles, right? So the story of Cain and Abel, Charles and Adam follow the story of Cain and Abel up until the murder. The murder is attempted but not gone through, and instead of Abel being the one that stays because he's now dead, and Cain being exiled and forced to, wander aimlessly, it's now flipped, right? Cain is the one that is forced to stay, and Abel and Adam is supposed to be, or is forced out, and is now in the military, and then is in and effectively wanders for years and years and years and years and years, right? And we get an immediate understanding of this immense failure that happens, right? It's a failure on both ends, because Charles, as a representation of Cain, effectively works himself to death, right? He is so overcome with this guilt and this guilt over what has happened but he doesn't have anywhere to put it other than to work and to work and to work and to work. Adam, on the other hand, is in the situation in which he has nothing to be guilty of, right? He has just existed in a way that, people happen to find pleasurable. And in doing so, right, he never really gets seen, or there's never any wrongdoing on his part, right? And so he becomes this effervescent, right, iridescent character of goodness and morality, but it's also a self-righteousness, right? Even if he doesn't really admit it. So that all happens. Then we have the introduction of the devil, right? In which is represented by Kathy. Adam marries Kathy because Adam, in his inability to reconcile with the fact that people can be both good and evil, he finds Kathy. Kathy is beaten and bruised and barely clinging to life, and he nurses her back to health, right? And in doing so, he creates a character that is of all the good things in the world, right? Because he would never be able to understand how someone who was bad could do that, or could be beaten in that way and then still survive and then be taken care of, right? He can't fathom that ideal. And so Adam effectively forcibly marries Kathy and then forcibly moves her out to the Salinas Valley. In the meantime, Charles has gotten Kathy pregnant. And then, once the twins are born, Kathy shoots Adam. Kathy leaves. Adam's left with himself, his servant, who is Lee, who is an Asian American, first generation, and leaves, almost never be seen again. And now Adam is left with two boys. He basically shuts himself out, right, and doesn't really care about them. So it's up to Lee to raise them. And then we get the second story of Cain and Abel, which is done through Aaron it's done through Aaron and Caleb. In which, once again, we have almost the same exact situation come up, in which Aaron, although is not as physically adept or mentally adept, has this aura around him that makes people like him, right? It just seems like he can't do any wrong, versus Caleb, who, although being more physically adept and is smarter and is way more cunning and way better actually being around people, is considered bad or considered this negative influence on the world, right? And so he learns to just kind of bottle himself in. And then we get this actual thing, because now we actually get to see the differences of someone who only gets portrayed in a positive and good light and someone who only gets portrayed in a negative light, and how do they actually cope with those things. And the person that was born in a good light, well, they become self-righteous about it, right? Aaron becomes this master of only ever trying to do good in the world, but also never being able to handle things when they go bad or when they go wrong. Cal, on the other hand, is at first enthralled by this concept of self-pity, right? That he is evil and there's nothing he can do about it. But then eventually learns about how to overcome those things and reconcile those parts of him that he feels are evil, right? And try to do some good in the world, right? But then we have the murder, right? It's not direct murder, but what eventually happens, right? Cal has known that his mother Kathy is still alive, and this mother Kathy runs a they refer to it as a whorehouse or a prostitution house that is really devoid of clarity or devoid of any sort of semblance of goodness, right? Cal finds out about this and he's able to keep it a secret for a while. But once again, we have this thing where there are presents to be involved. And the presents this time is Cal tries to give money that he has made through bean trading during World War I. Aaron, his gift is just simply his presence of existence and being back, right? And so one of them, simply because he is viewed as being good, his presence is enough and is considered a gift, versus one who has done a lot of extra work and outsmarted a lot of people and outworked a lot of people is being viewed as poorly because of the manner in which he got the money, right? Because Adam believes that the money basically shows that the farmers that actually farmed the land got cheated out of that profit and that money, right? But when that happens, Cal then takes his brother Aaron to the whorehouse to meet their mother, and Aaron cannot handle it, right? And because Aaron is so full of his own self-righteousness and his own goodness in the world that he doesn't understand that there could ever be any semblance or blood of bad and negativity in him, right? And so he, in seeing this, is so upset by this fact that he immediately enlists in World War I and then is dead a couple months later, right? And Cal feels responsible for that death, right? Because if Cal had never taken Aaron to his mother, none of this would have ever happened, right? And Aaron would still be alive. And then Adam tells Caleb, Tim shall, and that's how the book ends, right? Those are the Cain and Abel stories, right? Which I think it's a huge part of this, right? And it's the main focus throughout all of this, which is why I spend so much time on it. But there are so many other things going on here, right? This is a book that is so in depth and just has so much going on in it that it's impossible to talk about everything, right? without feeling like I'm gonna die. Right, there's a huge portion of this which is dedicated to the envisionment and the embodiment of Kathy or Kate as a snake, right, and building a den. There's huge portions of that. We also get quite a bit of like what's in a name, right? And it stands the question of like how much weight do we put on the names that we give people, right? Because we have someone like Kathy, which comes from the Greek word katharus, I believe. But basically it comes from the Greek word for pure or clean. And as we learn, Kathy is anything but. Not because she is a sex worker and she does those things, but because of the cruelty that exists within her once she has power over someone, right? And in fact, and in essence has gone the exact opposite of her namesake. But then we also have characters like Aaron, right? Aaron in the story builds up his father as this beautiful, immense being that can never have done anything wrong because he's never seen his father do anything wrong. But once he finds out that his father lied to him about his mother still being alive, and then also that, that there's some wickedness and some evilness in him, right? He effectively exiles himself, which is similar to Aaron from the Bible, right? Aaron from the Bible is the older brother of Moses, and Aaron is the one who creates the golden calf, right? As the story is, Moses goes up the mountain, and it takes weeks for him to receive these commandments from God. And the followers down at the base of the mountain, who have been left with Aaron, have gone restless and they want to leave. And so Aaron creates a false idol in the golden calf to get them to stay and worship and be present, right? Much in the same way that East of Eden, Aaron has created this false idol and false worship because he doesn't understand the whole context of what's happening, right? Even in his relationship with Abra, he does the same thing where he envisions her and embodies her as this perfect being, but doesn't actually ever know who she is, right? And doesn't quite understand that she also has some evil things within her. Yeah, right. It's just so dense, and there's so many things, and I feel like you could find something on every page to talk about if you really wanted to. The final thing I'll talk about is Steinbeck basically proposes that there's 3 types of men in the world, right? Because that's another part of this book, is that generally the first 2 chapters and the last chapter in each part is Steinbeck talking directly to the audience, right? Instead of it being a character. And John Steinbeck proposes that there's basically 3 types of people in the world. There are people that are cruel and make money and then never spend any of it, never enjoy any of it, right? And when they die, the world's like, good heavens, thank God he's dead. There's a second type of person who is cruel and makes money, but then sees their wickedness and then tries to give that back, right? Their tangible wealth back, right? And investing in things and whatnot. And as Steinbeck describes it, it's this feeling of like, you have to show on the outside that you are upset about this, but interior wise you're glad, right? And then there's a third type of man, which is someone who gains no tangible wealth, but upon one's death is mourned by the world, right? And that the world will never be the same, right? because they exude so much positivity into the world, right? But also, it's important to recognize that it's not self-righteous goodness, right? It is not the Adam or the Aaron goodness in which you do good because that's all you know. It is the Samuel goodness in the world, right? Samuel is one of the main characters here, and his goodness to the world is being this first person to really understand the concept of Timshel, right? Of recognizing that we all have our own interior faults, but even with those, we can overcome them and still act in a positive and good way, even if we have seen the bad of the world, right? So that's that. That's East of Eden. I could probably talk for another hour if I really want to, but I'm tired. That's East of Eden.